You're on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. Our guest is Naomi Klein, journalist, best-selling author. Her most recent book is This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate, out today in paperback. A documentary film directed by Avi Lewis, based on This Changes Everything, will be released in the fall. Naomi, you have recently returned from the Vatican. Can you describe that experience? What were you doing there?
So I was there at a conference that was convened by Cardinal Peter Turkson, and Cardinal Peter Turkson has been doing a lot of the speaking on the encyclical. It wasn't convened by Francis, just to set that record straight. It was convened by Cardinal Turkson's office and also by the organization representing Catholic development agencies. And it was part of the rollout for the climate change encyclical. The organizers described what they were doing as building a megaphone for the encyclical, because they understand that it's words on a page unless there are groups of people around the world who are amplifying that message in various ways. So there were people from around the world. There were people there, for instance, from Brazil, who were talking about how the movements there that have been fighting, large dams, oil drilling, fighting for more just transit, are going to be putting huge resources behind popularizing the climate change encyclical, buying radio ads, producing videos, creating teaching materials for every chapter of the encyclical, and really using it as an organizing tool. That was one of the things I was really struck by while I was there, was just how ready, particularly the movements in Latin America, are to operationalize the encyclical, if you will. And they also talked about not wanting it to be domesticated, was a phrase I heard a lot, domesticated by the church. There's a way in which you can just take this document that is, almost 200 pages and just take out the safest parts of it. We're against climate change and we all need to kind of hold hands. But in fact, if you read the document, it's very clear in calling for a different economic model. It's a challenge to what Pope Francis calls our throwaway culture. So they want to make sure that the parts of the encyclical that really do represent the deepest challenge to our current economic system and represent the most hope for the people who are excluded from the benefits of that economic system are really highlighted.
Well, last month, Pope Francis went on a tour of South America in his first foreign trip after unveiling the historic encyclical urging climate action. In Ecuador, he reiterated his call for social justice and environmental preservation.
The goods of the earth are meant for everyone, and however much someone may parade his property, it has a social mortgage. In this way, we move beyond purely economic justice, based on commerce, towards social justice, which upholds the fundamental human right to a dignified life. The tapping of natural resources, which are so abundant in Ecuador, must not be concerned with short-term benefits.
That was Pope Francis speaking in Ecuador. Naomi Klein, could you talk, you've mentioned in the past the significance of the Pope's origins in Argentina and the particular form that Catholicism took in Latin America. Could you talk about the significance of that and the kind of turn that you witnessed at the Vatican in the focus of this new Pope and the Church under his leadership?
Sure, Naomi. Yeah, it was definitely striking that a lot of the people who are real players in the Vatican right now come from the global South. As you mentioned, Pope Francis is from Argentina, and he is the first pope from the global South. And Cardinal Turkson is originally from Ghana and is talked about as potentially going to be the first African pope. And you see the influence. There are a lot of people who have a history with liberation theology around this Pope. He doesn't come from that particular tradition, but there's clearly an influence because before he became Pope, he worked with the Latin American Council of Bishops, which, the form of Catholicism in Latin America is one that is more influenced by indigenous cosmology than perhaps in North America and definitely in Europe, precisely because the genocide of indigenous people in Latin America was far less complete. So, the first phrase of the encyclical, the first paragraph of the encyclical, quotes Francis of Assisi referring to the earth as sister and as mother, and then goes on to talk about Francis of Assisi, not Pope Francis, and it's significant that Pope Francis chose the name Francis, the first pope in history to choose that as his name. How he ministered to plants and animals and saw them as his brothers and sisters. And obviously in there you have echoes of indigenous cosmologies that see all of creation as our relations. While I was at the Vatican, I did ask, and before and afterwards, talk to different theologians about whether there's any precedent for a pope using this language of Mother Earth so prominently, and nobody could think of a single example of this. So, I think what is significant about it is that it is very much a rebuke to the worldview that humans have been put on Earth to dominate and subjugate nature. That is very clear in the encyclical, and the major theme of the encyclical is the theme of interdependence. You also mentioned or you played that clip where Francis talks about natural resources as being something that everybody has a right to. And this, of course, is a challenge to a pretty basic principle of private property under capitalism, that if you buy it, it's yours to do with whatever you want. And that's something else that's very strong in the encyclical, is the idea of the commons, that the atmosphere is a commons, that water is a right. And I do think that you can see the influence of Pope Francis's many years in Argentina. He ministered in the outskirts of Buenos Aires, and that's somewhere where I spent some time doing reporting and filmmaking. And the outskirts of Buenos Aires have had one of the most catastrophic experiences with water privatization, where a French water company came in and put in the pipes, but then refused to put in the sewers. So every time it rains, there are these huge floods, and there's even cases of bodies being washed up in the streets and in people's basements. So, which is simply to say, he knows of which he speaks. I mean, he has seen a very brutal form of deregulated capitalism introduced in the southern cone of Latin America, and he also understands that this is a form of capitalism that in that part of the world was imposed with tremendous violence.
Naomi Klein, as we wrap up very quickly, the Pope is coming to the United States in September. But before that, he will go to Cuba first. Can you talk about the significance of the Cuba trip, and then within the presidential race here, the Pope landing in the United States?
Well, I think the timing of this trip is obviously going to be very awkward for several Republican candidates who are Catholic, and understand that this is a very, very popular Pope. He's particularly popular among Latinos, and that's a really coveted voting bloc. So, picking a fight with this Pope is not a very smart political move if you're running for office right now. I met somebody while I was, I can't use his name because it was just, it wasn't an interview situation, but I met a fairly prominent Catholic while I was at the Vatican from the United States, from a major U.S. organization, who said, well, the Holy Father isn't doing us any favors by going to Cuba first, by which he meant that, there are a lot of people talking about how this Pope is sort of a closet socialist, and by going to Cuba first, he was reinforcing that narrative. So I think for conservative, Republicans, Anglican Catholics, the fact that this Pope is going to Cuba first, but also because he has said such critical things about deregulated capitalism, and everything he's saying about climate change is putting them into, frankly, uncharted territories. They really don't know how to navigate these waters.
It's President Obama's birthday today. Do you have any particular birthday wishes for him?
Amy, I had no idea. Thanks for telling me, and I wish him a very happy birthday.
Naomi Klein, we want to thank you for being with us, journalist, best-selling author. Her most recent book is called This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate. It's out in paperback today. And she's got a documentary film coming out. It's directed by Avi Lewis, based on This Changes Everything. It's out in the fall. She also, together with Avi Lewis, made The Take about Argentina, her past books, No Logo, and The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism. When we come back, another journalist has been killed in Mexico, along with 4 women in Mexico City. We'll go to Mexico City. Stay with us.